Absolute very good morning to everyone. My name is Anne Pakoa. I'm the Executive Director and founder of the Vanuatu Human Rights Coalition. Welcome to this live mainstream event. And this is the event that will come into for us to launch the beginning of the 16 Days of Activism. And before we go ahead with our activities for today, I would like to acknowledge the forefathers that have gone, the forefathers of this land. And I know that they're present here with us. For those whose lives have been taken by domestic violence and those that are going through all issues and forms of domestic violence, I hope that you can join us again today. But I'm also join the others that have lost their lives and also the families of those that have lost their lives due to domestic violence. I hope that today's event will be able to commemorate those lives that have taken, but also the lives we're living today. With further ado, I would just like to acknowledge those that are here today, those that you're watching around the Pacific, but also the rest of the world. This is going to be a very exciting event. We're going to start off with the speakers, and we have our speakers today from the UNDP Pacific Office in Fiji. We have Mr. Levan Bozadri, and then we have the UN Women representative, that's Ms. Sandra Beklau. We have the Ministry of Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation in Fiji, Director of Women, Ms. Salai Faye Korofusere. So we're going to have a couple of speakers today and panelists today. What we're going to look at today and our conversation will be mainly on the emerging, what are the impact of the COVID-19, how it's impacting the lives of everyone, but in particular women and girls. So for now, I'll just give up to our special time now. I'd like to give it to the UNDP Pacific Office in Fiji, Mr. Levan Bozadze. Please, the floor is yours.
No, thank you, and I just want to make sure that you hear me all right. Okay, it seems like the case. Yeah, maybe I'll drop some of the formalities that we normally address forums like this, but clearly I want to recognize the presence of Sandra Bernklau, representative of UN Women Fiji Multi-Country Office, as well as a representative from Ministry of Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation in Fiji, as well as representatives from various NGOs, civil society organizations, government representatives from other countries. I don't really see who is present in my limited panel here, but considering this is a Facebook event, I hope we have a wider coverage. We also see some colleagues from different parts of the UN system. I see the other media representatives as well. So yes, welcome. It's an opportunity for me to welcome you today on the first multi-country event organized by UNDP Pacific Office. So this is the initiative that is supported by New Zealand Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And the event officially inaugurates the starting of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. And it will culminate in a Human Rights Day, will end in Human Rights Day, which is December the 10th. The event is part of 3 planned series of gatherings that will take place on Facebook in the next few weeks. Representatives from Fiji, Solomon Islands, Tonga, Vanuatu, and Federated States of Micronesia, the representatives from government, civil society, women's organization, private sector, will share their experiences and contribute to a fruitful discussion. Under the theme, End Violence Against Women Now, Respond, Innovate, and Leave No One Behind to Orange the World, UNDP Pacific Office joins the call upon activists, governments, and the UN partners to mobilize people and highlight issues relevant to preventing and ending violence against women and girls, not only once a year, which is the case now, but every month and every day. So as in previous years, the color orange will be used to represent a brighter future, free from violence against women and girls, as a unifying theme running through all global activities of the Unite campaign. And just to remind you, Unite is the United Nations Secretary General's campaign to end violence against women by 2030. So today, 25th of November, is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and we would like to emphasize the importance of prevention and response initiatives in the fight against GBV. UNDP has been supporting GBV prevention and response work through the Spotlight Initiative in Vanuatu and Fiji. The Spotlight Initiative has supported the work around survivors' access to services, development training materials and guidelines on GBV, community awareness creation on GBV, trained women on GBV and reproductive health rights, capacity building and training of key stakeholders, plans to renovate public prosecutor's office, training to MPs in gender-sensitive budgeting in the Solomon Islands and Fiji. During the event, we will hear from our expert partners and their experiences on how to prevent and respond to violence during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. COVID-19 has exacerbated all the risk factors for violence against women and girls, including unemployment and poverty, which reinforced many of the root causes, such as gender stereotypes and harmful social norms. In this context of lockdown measures and physical distancing, preventing and responding to gender-based violence in the Pacific region is more crucial than ever. Today, we aim at raising awareness on prevention against GBV and the existing GBV response services available in the region, to show how services for survivors GBV have been essential during COVID-19 lockdown, but also how GBV is deeply interconnected with other vulnerability factors such as extreme weather events and environmental degradation. To conclude, I wish to call on all stakeholders to join hands in hands to fight violence against women and girls and offer services to survivors of GBV. The building better and building forward together for post-COVID-19 should have a focus on GBV prevention and response and ensure women and girls live a world free of violence. Thank you all for joining in the launch of 16 Days of Activism. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boaz today. Apologies if I did pronounce your name correctly. I'm very sorry, sir. But thank you very, very much for your wonderful motivational remarks. We will now call upon the UN Women representative of the region, Ms. Sandra Penkalau. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Anne. Pulavanaka colleagues, and a very good morning from Suva, Fiji. Thank you so much, Levon and UNDP, for inviting me to this event. I'm Sandra Brunkle. I'm the rep for UN Women in the Pacific, and I'm really pleased to be here alongside our UN sister agencies, human rights, women human rights defenders and advocates, our colleagues from the Ministry of Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation. It's wonderful to be here together to mark the beginning and commemorate the beginning of the 16 Days of Activism to eliminate violence against women and girls. So I'm going to talk a bit about why the 16 Days of Activism is so important and how it began. I think we know the issues very well. We know the issues globally and in the Pacific. We know that globally, 1 out of 3 women will experience physical or sexual violence in her lifetime. And this increases to double the global average, 2 out of 3 women in the Pacific. We have to state outrightly, violence against women and girls is an absolutely grave violation of human rights. and it is deeply rooted in gender inequality and gender-based discrimination. The 16 days of activism is the time that we galvanize our actions towards the elimination of violence against women and girls, making sure that it's, raised, that people understand that it is a human rights issue. And we need to raise awareness about this at the local, national, regional, as well as international levels. So what is the 16 days? How did this come about? We know that it starts on November 25th, marking the International Day for Elimination of Violence Against Women. It completes on December 10th, which is International Human Rights Day. So the key purpose of the campaign is linking the violations against women and girls as a human rights issue. Now, I was asked to speak on UN Women's role in 16 days. Now, 16 days came about as a civil society campaign. Civil society has been at the forefront of the 16 days of activism. And so UN Women's role is really to support civil society as well as government partners in making sure that their national actions are supported. So our main role as UN agencies and the Unite campaign is to come up behind and support national actions towards the elimination of violence against women and girls. So really wanted to stress that this campaign was born out of civil society, and really the role of the UN campaign is to back it and support our civil society partners and government partners. So what does UN Women do in this work? Well, we're committed to supporting our civil society partners and governments across the Pacific. National ownership of the campaign is absolutely critical, and all of the countries around the Pacific will be launching their own events starting today. We've seen events starting in Kiribati, in Samoa, Palau, Marshall Islands. It has truly been embraced across the Pacific, and governments and civil society are joining together and working together very well to really raise awareness about violence against women and girls, ensuring that it's raised as a human rights violation. We're also partnering with, sports organizations, faith-based organizations, because of their importance in the Pacific and their, the potential of those institutions to raise awareness through faith-based mediums, through churches, through our mosques, our temples, make sure that everybody understands the relationships between violence against women and girls and human rights. UN Women also supports governments and civil society throughout the year through our programs, the Pacific Partnerships to eliminate violence against women and girls, as well as the Spotlight program. We work in areas of improving service delivery for survivors of violence, setting policies, setting together operational processes for service providers ranging from police to crisis centers to governments. So there's a lot of work behind the scenes that goes on throughout the year towards the elimination of violence against women and girls. I want to talk about three key messages for the campaign this year. Obviously, COVID-19 has exacerbated violence against women and girls, and we're learning more and more about that. Even before COVID-19, violence against women was one of the most widespread violations of human rights, with almost 18% of women and girls experiencing physical and sexual violence by an intimate partner. This is globally in the previous year. But what we're learning more about is that COVID-19 is also threatening to undo much of the progress we've made towards the elimination of violence against women and girls. That, the lockdowns, the economic hardships have kept women from gaining access to opportunities, rights, and services. And all of these things have been compounded by the impact of COVID-19. We know that the levels of violence against women and girls have barely improved over the past decade. And we also know the data would be higher if it included the full continuum of violence. We often think just about violence against women and girls as domestic violence, but all the many forms of violence, such as sexual harassment, violence in digital and online contexts, and harmful practices, as well as sexual exploitation. COVID-19 has exacerbated all the risk factors for violence against women and girls, including unemployment and poverty, reinforcing many of the harmful social norms and root causes and gender stereotypes that lead to violence. It's been estimated, for example, that 11 million girls may not return to school because of COVID-19. The economic fallout is expected to push 47 million more women and girls into extreme poverty, reversing decades of progress and perpetuating structural inequalities that reinforce violence against women and girls. And even worse, we know the issue remains largely unreported due to the impunity, silence, stigma, and shame that still surrounds it. So in summary, I just want to emphasize the importance of the 16 days of activism and to highlight that sexual and gender-based violence is a grave violation of human rights. We need to advocate for change, improvement, of course, in services and support to survivors of violence, but also to raise awareness and advocate for changes in the social norms and behaviors that perpetuate violence. Violence against women is not anyone's culture. It must stop. It's a violation of human rights. It's not only harmful to women and girls, but it's harmful to men and boys and to everyone because it perpetuates toxic, violent behaviors that do harm and don't benefit anyone. Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me today.
Thank you very much, Ms. Benklau, for that wonderful, wonderful speech. Yes, your speech has reminded us again that as we speak, there's a lot of women that continue to face a lot of violence, and in particular violence to the human rights of those most vulnerable groupings. So thank you very much again, Madam, for reminding us again today to raise awareness together, because this is everybody's business. And in particular for civil society, to have stronger voice, we need to stand together to fight against this violence against women. So again, just to remind everyone, for those of you that are joining in live and have joined in late, warm welcome again. Today we arranged the world. We commemorate the 16 days of activism, and we've had two amazing speakers so far. Now, let's warmly welcome the Ministry of Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation in Fiji, Director of Women, Mi Salai Fe Korovusere. The floor is yours, Honorable Minister.
Thank you. The UNDP resident representative, Mr. Bonze, the representative of UN Women, Ms. Sandra Banklo, speakers, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, and on behalf of the Ministry Executive and the Director of Women, I'm very pleased to be here today for the commencement of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. Let me begin by saying that the Fijian government is committed to the safety and well-being of our citizens. Through our constitution, to our commitments to international conventions, we remain dedicated to addressing and eliminating the scourge of gender-based violence. The ministry has been working smartly to continue implementing the national gender policy. This is with specified activities and key areas which shape the government response to working with our key stakeholders for gender equality, including the work to eliminate gender-based violence. The ministry work on the Fiji Country Gender Assessment will inform on the status of women and girls in Fiji, and further provide a comprehensive overview of gender issues in various sectors and critical areas, including health, economy, violence against women and girls, gender and environment, women in leadership and decision-making, and others. The country gender assessment is envisioned to highlight many of the achievements made to date in Fiji, while at the same time providing comprehensive policy briefs to deepen collective efforts for achieving gender equality and empowerment of all women and girls. The Ministry for Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation, as the lead agency in developing the National Action Plan to prevent violence against women and girls, has commenced a consultation of an evidence-based, whole-of-government and whole-of-population approach, measurable and inclusive 5-year plan with an emphasis on stopping violence before it starts. So the National Women's Machinery works to promote gender equality and empowerment of all women and girls by mainstreaming their participation in Fiji's social economic development. This is strengthened and supported by the department's coordination role to ensure efficient and effective implementation of policies and programs towards ending violence against women and girls. Whilst highlighting our effort and roles, it is clear that more needs to be done, and at the same time, faced with challenges that prevents the response and prevention work. This includes the understanding and dealing with the root causes of gender-based violence, and that is gender inequality. Understanding of existing legislations that deal with this issue, and therefore limiting women and girls' access to safety and injustice. Accessibility to services by survivors and community at large, and also providing an enabling infrastructure that will ensure sustainability of services in times of emergency. In light of COVID-19 pandemic and its impact, the National Women's Machinery continues its coordination role, not only on gender-based violence response and prevention, however, on gender equality and empowerment of women, and the most vulnerable, including children. The Ministry, through the Department of Women, formed and led the Gender-Based Violence Working Group at national level in 2020. This is to advance prevention and response to violence against women and girls during emergencies and coordinate the implementation of the National Service Delivery Protocol for responding to cases of gender-based violence. The impact of COVID-19 cuts across all sectors and affects everyone. Therefore, the gender-based violence response and prevention must also be seen as gender inclusive, leaving no one behind. At divisional level, and particularly in the Northern Division, the department continued its coordinated response work during Tropical Cyclone Yasa and Anna in December last year. Last week on this day, had established the Divisional Gender-Based Violence and Service Delivery Protocol Working Group, and this will also be set up at district level. So it's not only to align such platform from national to divisional level, however, to ensure including key service providers in this coordination work at all levels. The Ministry will continue to work with relevant stakeholders in coordinating response work, intervention, and also development of strategies to prevent and stop violence before it starts. With that said, I would like to convey the Ministry's appreciation to civil society and women's rights organizations, essential service providers, as well as UN Women, the UN agencies and development partners, government ministry for their support and effort to provide response work during pandemic and continue in our work on the development of the National Action Plan to prevent violence against women and girls. We also, the Ministry for Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation, would like to convey our appreciation to UNDP, the resident coordinator in the team, for the support provided and in enabling us to be part of this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tarobasera, for that wonderful speech. And also, it's very important to contextualize those regional policies so that it can be easier for us, for actors on the ground, to upgrade or to advance on their actions to ensure that every one of us are very serious about eliminating gender-based violence in our beautiful region. Let me just, before we go to the next session and call upon Ms. Sandra Venclau, I would just like to say that please just make sure that when you're speaking, just stick to your 5 minutes because we might be able to run out of time. But thank you so much for our earlier speakers. Our next topic will be emerging gender-based violence risks in the context of COVID-19, a Pacific Islands overview. So we will have a couple of speakers, two speakers actually for this session. We have Ms. Sandra Venclau, and then we have the UNDP Bangkok Regional Hub Gender Team Leader, UAE. So with no further ado, I'd like to give the floor to Ms. Venclau for your presentation this morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne Bulavanaka again. And I'm here to just give the broad overview of the statistics around not only globally, but also around the Pacific. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. I think that many of you are well aware that in the Pacific, we've had many countries undergoing what's called the Family Health and Safety Surveys. So we do have a lot of data in the Pacific. But here's some facts globally. We know that on an average, 736 million women aged 15 years or older, nearly 1 in 3 women globally experience violence. So violence against women and girls isn't, you know, it is pervasive. And when we say pervasive, it is commonly experienced by women around the world. If we can move to the next slide, please. We also know that we, as women, experience multiple forms of violence and violence throughout our entire lifetime, ranging from youth and adolescence, as well as women who are aging. Here's some statistics from UNICEF. 15 million adolescent girls worldwide have experienced forced sex in some point of their life, aged 15 to 19. Next slide, please. As I said earlier, we have had numerous studies conducted in the Pacific, so we have a very good idea of the rates of violence, as well as the types of violence, when it occurs, you know, and the multiple forms in which violence occur. So we've had 13 countries conducting national women's health and safety surveys. We found out that we are twice the global average. 2 out of 3 women in the Pacific experience violence. 39%, for example, in Vanuatu, have been injured as a result. So this is, you know, extreme forms of violence that have resulted in injury. 19% have lost consciousness at least once. For example, 32% of women in the Cook Islands have experienced one form of controlling behavior, whether that's controlling a woman's movement, her decision-making, how she spends money, where she goes, whether she works. Those controlling behaviors are also forms of violence. Next slide, please. We also know that COVID-19 has exacerbated all forms of violence, whether it's the controlling behaviors, physical violence, violence around whether women can access support and services has become even more difficult during COVID-19. COVID-19 has impacted women negatively, reducing our abilities to reach out and get support, reach out and get independence, and have access to equal opportunities. It has increased all forms of violence within the household as well. So we've got quite a few statistics on this globally, and we know this is also the case in the Pacific. Next slide, please. terms of COVID-19 in the Pacific, we were very, very, grateful to have a COVID-19 working group through the Ministry of Women and Children, Poverty Alleviation in Fiji, together with Fiji Women's Rights Movement, Diva for Equality, UN Women and ADB, getting together and looking at the impact of COVID-19 during the initial lockdown in Fiji. And we could compare that to what was happening globally. We know that there are long-term impacts that we will be able to learn more about how COVID-19 has impacted women in the Pacific. But in the initial lockdown, there was an immediate need for increased support and services. There was an increased number of reach out for calls for assistance, both for shelter support, counseling support, as well as medical support. So this came through increased calls to national helplines. Next slide, please. We also know there was an increase in reported violence in countries throughout all the lockdowns. Women were impacted very profoundly, especially in the Pacific, by COVID-19, as the majority of women are working in the informal economy. And this led to a reduction in revenue, as well as an increased workload. We also know that women were most of the frontline workers, nurses, vendors, service providers. So they were directly on the front lines and exposed to COVID-19. Women also faced, through the COVID-19 period, an increase in domestic and care duties. Women were still caring for children at home, caring for their family, doing the domestic work, as well as caring for the elderly and those that were sick with COVID-19. So you can see this has increased the burden of care for women at home. So all of these placed further limitations on women and reduced their ability to access decision-making, support, services, leadership skills, and participate in economic activities. Next slide, please. So some of the mechanisms that UN Women and partners, governments, and civil society have been putting in place together around the region, there's been a whole range of responses to COVID-19 and gender-based violence, including making sure that existing procedures and protocols for service delivery have been adapted to COVID-19 situations, so that counseling, shelter operations, other services and care were able to put in place measures to respond during the COVID-19 pandemic. Some were able to provide services remotely and virtually. There were many online campaigns making sure that information was getting out, including getting out to remote rural communities, making sure that virtual services were available, phone services were also available. So there was a lot of campaigns with information getting out there so that people knew how to access services during the COVID-19 period. There was a lot of virtual training for service providers and support services, and grants to enable service providers to move to virtual support. So grants to facilitate purchasing, laptops and data so that services could continue to be provided. There was also a gender-based violence resource kit developed specifically for COVID-19 that has been rolled out around the region. Next slide, please. So thank you so much for this, the opportunity to give a broad overview. We're looking forward to supporting the work of our partners throughout the entire period of 16 days, as well as around the year. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Madame, for that very encouraging words as well, and especially for those of us activists, human rights activists, gender-based activists, gender-based violence activists, and those of us that are working hard to eliminate discrimination, all forms of discrimination against women. It's so good to have those supportive words from our very important speakers this morning. Let's now give the opportunity for our UNDP Bangkok Regional Hub, Ms. Poi Mayoi. And I think before she comes in, I would just like, with honor, I would just like to sincerely apologize for mentioning the Honorable Minister for Women. I think we had a representative, the DG, that came in to speak, and I apologize for that misaddress. So I'm really sorry. Let's now call upon Ms. Mayoi. Please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me to be here. And I'd like to also acknowledge the presence of our own resident representative Levan, and also Sandra from UN Women, our sister agency representative in the Pacific, and also the Minister of Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation of Fiji, and of course, important partners, gender equality and human rights advocates and activists. And ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to be here because, as Sandra, you reinforced the significance of the day earlier that can never be underestimated. This day has contributed to keeping the focus and increasing attention to the grave reality of violence against women and girls. So again, I'm honored to be here with you all who have been working tirelessly to eradicate this grave violation of human rights, to remind ourselves of the need to accelerate our action against violence against women and girls. As Levan mentioned earlier, UNDP continues to join efforts with our sister agencies, government and CSO partners to eradicate the violation of women's human rights. And since Sandra has already provided very comprehensive updates on the situation of violence against women and girls in the world and in the Pacific, let me zoom in on a particular aspect of the adverse impact of the pandemic, which actually taught us a lesson for us to be always ready for emerging situations. The COVID-19 crisis has led many to spend more time online. And although digital violence is an area that can do with more data and statistics, we have sufficient information to know that women and girls are more likely to experience cyber harassment, online sexual violence, and online misogyny. The existing gender gap in access to ICT and online resources means women are less experienced with ICT, making them more vulnerable in digital space. And the situation is complex. During the pandemic, survivors of GBV were searching for information, services, and support on what to do when experiencing violence, how to get help, and how to prevent violence online. This has exposed them to potential risk of harassment in digital space. At the same time, online support for survivors increased through groups on Facebook to shed light on domestic violence and issues women face, as well as Instagram posts and campaigns to raise awareness on violence against women and funds and resources for women's shelters. So the digital space was providing support to survivors of violence against women. At the same time, it was posing additional risk to their lives. This was a challenge that many countries faced that they didn't had to face before. And this situation calls for, of course, continued research, but also urgent action. And this action needs to engage a range of actors from the ICT sector and law enforcement agencies addressing cybercrime. Their engagement before the COVID-19 crisis may not have been as robust as it could be, but now we have all this new knowledge and facing new challenges. We must try to engage them more and more so that we can address this very serious issue. COVID-19 crisis is, of course, not the only crisis that is aggravating women's experiences of violence against women and girls. The Pacific is facing a double crisis with COVID-19 and climate change. And gender inequality and climate vulnerability are strongly interlinked. Climate change effects exacerbate existing gender inequalities, often resulting in more negative impacts for women and girls. During and after disasters, women are at greater risk of sexual and gender-based violence, including rape, sexual exploitation, and assault. Climate change is causing resources to be scarce, and in particular, natural resources. This leads to conflict at community level and in the household. A number of studies have pointed out the interconnectedness between climate change and increased violent behavior at these different levels, partly due to the impact of climate change on people's livelihoods, displacement, diminishing access to resources, increasing uncertainty, amongst others. So going forward, we must be aware of the intricate and complex linkages between violence against women and girls and everything else that are influencing and shaping our lives. And again, this leads to a need to expand our partnership in this fight against violence against women and girls, and including organizations and institutions, for example, in the context of climate change, those working on natural resources management, environment, and of course, climate change responses and climate change responses. And so we have been working on this issue for many years. And I think, as I mentioned at the beginning, this day has played a major role in keeping this action continue and our commitment renewed every year. And we also need to think of ways of expanding our partnership in this fight so that we could be more effective in addressing different aspects of the interconnectedness of violence against women and girls and different sectors of our lives. Now, women's leadership has been a vital element of eliminating violence against women. This is evident today, as I see strong and committed women and women's organizations gathered here to reinforce the message. So this is an area that we have made progress, and I think we need to, and I say we must continue to improve. At the same time, violence against women and girls affects all of us, men and women, boys and girls. And changing social norms around gender equality and violence against women and girls need to engage everyone. We have many empowered women and girls. We also need to empower men and boys to join the fight to eliminate violence against women and girls. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam, for reminding us again of the impact that COVID-19 has placed on the lives of our women and girls, but in particular, those that are already vulnerable and are more vulnerable with the current situation that's brought in by the pandemic. Okay, we're going into the next session. So the thesis will be on the prevention and response to gender-based violence in the context of COVID-19 pandemic. As we know, by stressing every one of the countries it touches, COVID-19, like we said, is nobody's friend. Today, COVID-19 is one of our greatest enemies, as we have seen from many of the all those speakers that have actually spelled out that COVID-19 has impacted, has brought in more severity of violence against women at all different contexts. We've heard earlier about Fiji, for example, how they've actually contextualized those policies to ensure that women are continuing to be protected by the impacts of the pandemic, but also Madam Koy, you've just reminded us again that climate change is one of the key contributing factors to increased domestic violence and violence against women and girls. So I would like to call on to our panelists. I am proud to say that we have one of our model, but also she's one of our great activists, Ms. Yasmina Bochon. She's from the Sister Foundation in Vanuatu. And then we have the next panelist for the REACH project and REACH buses, Mr. Thomas Bali from the Ministry of Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation in Fiji. We have the GPV and Environment Degradation, Ms. Aliti Munisia, the Gender and Climate Specialist. So each one of you will have 10 minutes to speak. Please stick to your time. With no further ado, I would like to call on our beautiful Yasmin. The floor is yours.
Hello, distinguished guests, fellow activists, ladies and gentlemen, and hello to you, Anne. Thank you so much for that very warm welcome. My name is Yasmin Bjornum, and I'm the executive director of SISTA. SISTA is a feminist organization established in Vanuatu in 2016. We use arts, media, and communications to empower women and girls, raise awareness, and advocate on issues that affect them. So we believe that one of the biggest barriers to achieving gender equality is the behavior and attitudes towards women. Our approach is to address the root cause of why women and girls are disadvantaged in society by tackling individual and social factors using arts, media, communications. So I'll just give you a bit of an example. We recently held a fashion show, which was to build the capacity of local designers and to showcase local handicrafts by Vanuatu Skills Partnership, a DFAT-funded program. But we also used fashion as an innovative entry point to promote body positivity and empower women and men to feel good about their bodies, to feel confident to express themselves, and to talk about gender norms. What is an ideal Ni Vanuatu man? What does he look like? What is an ideal Ni Vanuatu woman? What does she look like? What happens when someone dares to express their individuality through their clothing? Clothing is political, and you would know this, particularly if you identified as someone from the Soji community. It's very affirming to wear clothes that affirm your identity. So we believe that for women and girls to be empowered and have equal standing in society, we need to address these knowledge gaps, shift attitudes, encourage new behaviors, and evolve social norms. We try to do this in a way that is accessible for the everyday person. And this is why we use Facebook and arts. So like the fashion show, yes, we get these young people on board, look at this fashion, and then we're like, bang, let's talk about gender norms. Let's talk about all these other underlying issues in a way that is easy to consume for the everyday person. So under the Spotlight Initiative, SISTA and HCDI have been using a Pacific-based story-on method to raise gender-based violence awareness and promote change. We started this by firstly conducting interviews with various stakeholders, including survivors, health and justice officers, community helpers, and reformed offenders. We wanted to understand, what does the journey to end violence against women and girls really, really look like? We've been talking about it for years. This is the same conversation we had last year and the year before. It's the same conversation. So, we tell women to speak out. We tell people to intervene. We encourage women to go to their chief, to their pastor, or to access services that deal with gender-based violence. But seriously, what does this look like? It's so easy to advise this, but the how-to is another question. And what are the actual challenges for this to be a reality? Yes, we have a system in place. Yes, we have services. Yes, we have standard of procedures, but the dots are simply not connecting, and the rates of violence are not decreasing. In Vanuatu, 60% of Ni Vanuatu women will experience violence by their partner in their lifetime. In fact, violence is so prevalent in our country that half our inmates are in jail because of sexual offenses, and most of their victims are their own family members. This is shocking, especially when you compare this with the fact that Vanuatu has thrice been voted the happiest country in the world. When I go overseas, I tell everyone how wonderful my people are. I can guarantee you, if I have a flat tire, the next Ni Vanuatu man who walks past will immediately stop and help to fix it. In fact, I've had incidents where buses have stopped, jumped out of their truck, and come out to help me. That's how incredible the men are in my country. And yet, we still have high rates of violence. So, as we conducted these interviews for our project called The Journey to Change, or as we say in Bishlama, Road Pa Chenis, it became increasingly obvious what the missing link was: the engagement of men and boys. Because violence against women is disproportionately perpetuated by men, men and boys need to become actively engaged to break the cycle in violence. As we say in Bishlama, you start him, but you flat him. You started it, you need to finish it. We also saw the barriers of our language, Bishlama. It does not allow for critical discussion. Our language is limited, very limited. We don't have words to unpack these issues, and this means it's a challenge to change the narrative. Regardless, we can all agree that we have done enough awareness raising. It's now time for accountability. So this is why SISTA, in partnership with HCDI, organized an advocacy campaign entitled Chinis Emista Lohan Bloyu, The Change is in Your Hands, that features male leaders talking about why Vanuatu men can and should do to stop the violence individually and collectively. The campaign is launched in partnership with the Malvatumari Council of Chiefs, the Department of Women's Affairs, and the Ministry of Justice and Community Services. It showcases 18 prominent male champions of change and highlights the role of men to prevent gender-based violence and to promote healthy and positive behavior in men. So for example, we had our Honorable Prime Minister call on men to break generational violence and talk about the commitment of the government to end the crime of violence against women and girls. We had the leader of opposition, Ralph Regenbanu, a consistent, noble man who has stood in solidarity with women throughout all the years, regardless of what position he's in government. He's always been there, emphasizing the importance of eliminating violence and discrimination against women for the sustainable development of Vanuatu. The Malvatumari Council of Chiefs President, Willie Pasau, reminds men, violence is not our custom, respect is our custom. So stop using custom as an excuse to cause violence, because that's not true. Respect is custom. And we featured prominent men from all sectors of the community, including well-known personalities, DJs, producers, artists, private sector. And we asked them to talk about specific things that men can do to actually play their role in eliminating violence against women and girls. We asked them to talk about consent, the importance of providing spaces and making spaces to include women, the need to support and believe women in your life who are facing violence instead of turning them away or blaming her for the violence that she receives, to understand the different types of violence. This is something that's really, men really don't, people think violence is just physical. It's not. It's emotional, it's monetary, it's, there's various types of violence. The need for women's leadership to ensure women's issues are prioritized and heard, recognizing that violence increases after a disaster and that we need to ensure that we meet women's specific needs to protect them. Calling on men to educate their boys about sex and taking responsibility for their choices, especially if they get a girl pregnant. We have high rates. We call them widows here in Vanuatu. They're actually single mothers. Men just leave women once they think it's not their responsibility. We now have children who are growing up without fathers because men refuse to take responsibility. And our Child Maintenance Act is completely outdated. It hasn't been changed since 1960s. That's way before independence. We talked about normalizing men, talking about their feelings and learning how to communicate. And we also had a male champion call on men to stop victim blaming and put responsibility where it belongs. These videos were produced by an all-female production team led by Starlight Photography, and they'll be broadcast tonight on BBTC and on a social media page, Stand Up Strong Against Violence, throughout the 16 Days of Activism. Wow, I only have 10 seconds left. I can't believe I've gone over nearly 10 minutes. Is this 5 minutes, Anne, or 10? Okay, so, listen, all I can say, when SISTA was started, it was born from a place of anger and passion. Over the years, this has turned into compassion and healing. You begin to realize that these men who are enacting violence, they're not okay. They have learned unhealthy ways to cope and express, and they are not necessarily bad people. We all know that many of these men who are violent can be prominent men in society who contribute greatly to their nations, who are good fathers, and who, besides the violence, are often good husbands. Life is not black and white. Although the current trend of cancel culture likes to tell us otherwise, human beings are nuanced and multifaceted. Why haven't men been calling out other men? Because men are afraid of men too. We have to start getting men to start healing, because us women have been doing that work, and we are in the information age. It's time for men to start doing that as well. During this time of COVID, there's a lot of, it has shown that there's been potential to create devastating social, economic, and political crisis. But here in Vanuatu, it has also shown us what is important, and that is each other. When the borders closed up, we understood all we have is you and me, men and women. And so there's definitely been some positive things that have come out of this pandemic. Women's work that is usually invisible became visible. The solidarity among women became stronger. Local businesses wanted to support other local businesses. I hope as we move towards eliminating violence against women and girls, we begin to engage men more to break this cycle and have the courage to heal. We are in a time, and we are at an amazing time in the world where we can shift things. And yes, COVID has brought out a lot of these potential, yes, there's been a lot of crises, but it's also, as I say, some things don't necessarily break your heart, they actually open up your heart. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry. Healing and love to all.
And you're muted.
Thank you so much, Yasmin, for that very powerful presentation. Yes, life is not black and white, and there seems to be a disconnection, system disconnection, and yes, we really need to take this seriously. And thank you, Yasmin, for that very powerful speech presentation. You actually reminded us that the system is failing, and we need to pick up those broken pieces and move forward. Thank you. Thank you for reminding us. Let's now call upon our next, let's now call upon our next panelist from the Ministry of Women. We have Mr. Thomas Abali. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Bravanaka colleagues, I hope you can hear me.
We can hear you, yes, Mr. Bali. We can hear you very clear.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'll be presenting on behalf of the ministry. My name is Thomas Bali. I'm the Senior Economic Planning Officer with Ministry of Women, and I'll be presenting on the REACH project. REACH in long form means right, empowerment, and cohesion. And if I was to tell you in the simplest form what REACH project is about, REACH project is simply about taking state and non-state services to the rural areas. It can be rural and semi-urban areas. And all the work that is done by REACH is linked to SDG number 5, that is achieving gender equality and empowerment of all women and girls, and also goal number 16, which is committed to promote peaceful and inclusive society. Just a brief background, the REACH project had actually started in 2015, and this is the 6th year of running. Fijian government had made a commitment to the REACH project in 2017, whereby we have establishment of a unit, a specialized unit within the Ministry of Women, and we have allocated budget on which we work and conduct awareness in communities around Fiji. Just a brief background. So far, REACH program has reached 220 districts around Fiji, and whereby we have reached 31,000 people, of which 12,000 were women and girls. So in terms of REACH project's contribution towards prevention and response to gender based violence, what the project does is basically they create awareness on rights of women and girls, especially in rural communities. There are counseling services that are provided to women and girls by our partners, which are part of the REACH project. And these partners include Empower Pacific, Medical Services Pacific. So what these organizations basically do is they provide counseling services to women and girls in the areas that we visit. And just to let you know, there are 3 REACH buses that the ministry has. And these buses are like what you call mini, offices. So it means that in the buses we have 3 or 4 office which are properly secure where counseling can be held. And also in terms of REACH, it's a platform whereby women and girls can come and report if there are any gender-based violence, because there are organizations like Fiji Police that are part of the REACH program. So basically, if there are gender-based violence in communities, then women and girls are encouraged to report this through the REACH platform to the organizations like the Fiji Police Force. And also, not only do we create awareness to girls and women, but we also create awareness to men in the community of their important roles in elimination of gender-based violence. So those are some of the activities that we generally do at the REACH project. And currently we are working with the Japanese government and our partners from UNDP, and we are conducting awareness in the province of Nandronga and Navosa. And today the team is in Tau village, that's in Nandronga. And tomorrow we will be in Keasi. So everyone that is watching through the live platform, we encourage women and girls to come and take advantage of the services that would be provided through the REACH program, which would be at Keasi government station tomorrow. And just to let you know some of the partners that we work with in terms of REACH, we have our own Department of Social Welfare, Department of Women, we have Ministry of Health, Medical Services Pacific, Fiji Police Force, BDM, we have Spinal Injuries Association, Empower Pacific, Itoki Affairs, and also Elections Office. So these are some of the services that are available when REACH awareness are conducted in communities around Fiji. So as I had said earlier on, we have reached 220 districts. That's almost covering all the districts in Fiji, and we have reached out to 12,000 women and have provided them with the different services that are given by our partners. So that's basically it from my end, and I'll be most welcome to answer any questions or queries. And I also encourage everyone, if you have a chance, please do log in to our Facebook page, REACH Fiji, and you can see the success stories and the kind of awareness that we conduct in communities when we go out. And also you can get the latest update on where we'll be this week and also next coming week. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bell, for reminding us again that the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women and girls, domestic violence, violence against the human rights of every individual Pacific Islanders and those that are listening around the world, but also global citizenship. It's also very important that each of us work together in partnership. The recognition, the strengthening of partnership, to stand together in unity to fight against all forms of discrimination against women and girls is very vital at this time. So thank you, Mr. Bali, for reminding us again of the importance of partnership. Now, we're coming to the Q&A session. For those anyone that's here in the team, you can raise any questions. Our UNDP here standing by to collect your questions. We also open up time for those of us that joining us online, please you send in or you type in your questions. Glad to say that we have one question here for Ms. Yasmin. And the question is that how do we deal with toxic masculinity and its effect on GPV, focusing on how it affects boys as they grow up? I'd like to you, Ms. Yasmin.
Thank you so much, Anne. With the question with toxic masculinity, I think this is probably the new phase that I think we need to start going towards, in terms of, we raise a lot of awareness on violence, but we don't really talk about men and normalizing their feelings, finding new ways to express themselves. I feel like we should be going towards putting our resources towards that and continuously actually raising awareness about that. We all know that violence is wrong. We all know that, we all know that now. But how do we talk about the impacts of that on boys? We know how it impacts us girls, us women, but we don't talk about how it actually impacts boys. And this is not something that I can't answer that and say we should do this, this, this. No, this is a whole systematic change. And this is also internal inner work that we all need to work on. So to answer that question, I think this is, again, one of those, the new era when we're looking at eliminating violence against women and girls, to start focusing on raising information about what the impacts on boys, what does toxic masculinity look like, and what are other ways, and showing boys that there are other ways. Because one of the things that I found here in Vanuatu is that there aren't places for men to express themselves or to go. Recently, I helped someone come out of a violent relationship, and her ex-partner's father, who was giving me a hard time, came to my office, and he said to me, please, is there anywhere for my boy to go? I want my boy to go somewhere. And I was like, maybe he can go to the mind care unit. I don't know. Is there a support group? Us women always make the effort to come together. We have women's circles. We're doing the healing. But for the men, they need that as well. But they also need to take that leadership. And it's definitely not an easy thing to do. But I feel like we're at that time where we're opening up that time to do that.
Thank you very much, Yasmin, for responding to our questions. And if you're still out there and you want to raise a question, just please post your question here online. Also, we have a question. We have a question for Mr. Bali. Okay, so Mr. Bali, your question, I think I'll just send you the question. How many people, how many victims or survivors have reached the services that you provide?
Thank you very much. Just in terms of the stats, I'm also new to the unit. I've just started 2 months ago. So basically what happens is, like, when awareness are conducted, then we have Empower Pacific and medical services specific. So what happens is, when we have a form which we give to all organizations before awareness are conducted. So during when they are giving awareness, they record the kind of services they provide to the communities. And when we capture those records, then we have a database where we keep those records. So mostly in communities, when we do visit communities, maybe in a community there can be at least 1 or 2. But at times, women are very shy to come up to report those kind of gender-based violence. That's why awareness is really important, and platforms like Reach, to create awareness that it's not right to have violence against you, and it's very important to break the silence of violence. So awareness is important, but in terms of stats. We do have a database where we capture different kind of gender-based, reported cases. But in communities, if you go down to the communities, it can be 1 or 2 in communities, stuff like that.
Apologies for that. We have another Q&A, another question for Ms. Sandra. What needs to be done more at the global level to bring political leaders, heads of state and heads of government to be held accountable for commitments to end violence against women and girls? To you, madam.
Thank you so much, Anne, and thank you for the question. You know, there's a lot that we can do. And a lot of that work starts nationally. So, you know, annually, women gather in New York for the Commission on the Status of Women. That's one avenue, but also in terms of our CEDAW reporting, the majority of our Pacific Island countries have ratified CEDAW with the exception of Tonga and Palau. So holding our states accountable for those commitments. And a lot of that has to happen at the national level. So has your country reported? Have they fronted up before the CEDAW committee? As civil society organizations getting together and doing a CEDAW report together, you know, that goes alongside the government report, and making sure that states are accountable to their commitments. So at the global level, you know, we've got the CEDAW committee, we've got the Commission on the Status of Women, the Secretary General's commitments on the elimination of violence against women and girls, as well as gender equality. We've got the Beijing Plus 25 commitments. We had the Pacific Platform for Action. So we have a lot of commitments, including at the last Pacific Women's Ministerial Triennial Conference, where we again, as Pacific nations, reaffirmed our commitment towards eliminating violence against women and girls. So we have to hold our states to those commitments, and that's through national actions. At the global level, through the Universal Periodic Review, we can also, you know, review how are states doing? Are we doing well enough? You know, civil society organizations can put in reports on the Universal Periodic Review, and that holds states accountable at the global level for their human rights commitments through CEDAW, through those what used to be called shadow reports or parallel reports. So civil society actors coming together at the national level can have a great say, and there are at least those two avenues to hold your states accountable at the global level. And at the national level, you know, when states are running elections and when they're developing budgets, putting in budget submissions and asking to speak to parliamentarians, you know, what are you doing? What are you budgeting to make sure that we can progress the elimination of violence against women and girls? Are you contributing to the services and support that are needed? Are you contributing, you know, to changing the social norms and values that perpetuate violence? We just heard Yasmin saying, you know, where do men go when they need that support in terms of changing social norms? So are we putting in enough services and support? Are we making sure our laws on violence are fully implemented? Are we making sure that survivors of violence have access to services? So, you know, there's a lot that we can do at the national level, but holding our leaders accountable, and especially in budget processes or when elections come on, get together and say to those that are running for elections, what are you going to do? If I vote for you, what are you going to do to make sure that we eliminate violence against women and girls in our country? And if they don't have a clear platform, if they don't have a clear plan, don't vote for them. You know, so there's much that we can do at the national level as well as the international level. And at the regional level, we have, you know, the Pacific Women Ministerial Outcomes Document, the Triennial Outcomes Document. We also have the Pacific Leaders Gender Equality Declaration, where Pacific leaders got together and made a commitment as a Pacific region towards eliminating violence against women and girls. So there's lots of different platforms that we can use. The commitments are there. It's holding our leaders to those commitments. That's where the action has to come in at the national level. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Sandra. Let's now, we have another question for Ms. Kaur. The UNDP has a strategic plan. What in the plan that will help us to bring more transformative change for women as part of fighting and ending violence against women and girls? Right to you, Madam.
Oh, thank you. Yes, this is really a important issue for UNDP, and in the new strategic plan we have a chapter on gender equality specifically, and spelling out how we will be addressing gender equality and promoting it through different aspects of our work. Some of you may know that UNDP is a multidisciplinary organization. We work in a wide range of sectors, including climate change, natural resources management, governance, peace building, and inclusive growth, and so on. So what we're trying to do is gender equality need to be addressed in every aspect of this multidisciplinary approach of UNDP. And in particular, gender-based violence is recognized as an issue that requires not just this approach of addressing it from all aspects, but also need to be addressed as a single challenge and on its own. So we take this two-pronged approach, addressing gender-based violence as an obstacle for sustainable human development that we try to achieve, at the same time addressing it as part of everything else that we do. And for example, we talk about resilience building against shocks and disasters. We understand that if gender equality doesn't exist in community, that community's level of resilience is lowered. So we're missing out on opportunity to have a stronger community, more resilient community, or resilient household for that matter. And violence against women is an obstacle for achieving gender equality. So that's how we see it. We also look at prevention. So for example, we have a project in Bhutan actually, but the model came from the Pacific as well, where some years ago we implemented prevention intervention together with UN Women and UNFPA. Now we're looking at the same model now in Bhutan, which is engaging community members, young people, and people who give care to these people, so like parents, teachers, social workers, and so on, and to have structured dialogues. But these are dialogues, not not like lectures, and discuss violence-free family. So this is a very much a primary prevention approach. And this is one example of how concretely UNDP is addressing gender-based violence. We're also looking at masculinity, and someone mentioned toxic masculinity issue already, but we are looking at this also in relation to conflict as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Madam. We have the last and final question for Madam Mawa from the Fiji Ministry of Women. How do you engage other government ministries and departments in Fiji in your work in ending violence against women and girls? And what commitments do you get from other ministries and departments? But also, if you can tell us what is needed, what support is needed to advance the work you do. Thank you, Director.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. I would like to highlight our engagement in terms of the work around elimination of violence against women with other government departments. Firstly, I must say that with the National Service Delivery Protocol for responding to cases of gender-based violence, we have signatories, and also non-government organization, but from government organization. And with that, we have the gender-based violence working group, not just in normal time, but also in times of emergency, where we have them as part of these, including the Fiji Police Force, the Ministry of Health and Medical Services, the Judicial Department, the Ministry of Itoke Affairs, who's the work in relation to communities, just to mention a few. And with this, it's not just about coordinating from the ministry, but also looking at the implementation. And that's where we had begun in 2020 from national level, and we are also going to divisional level to ensure that the key service providers are also part of this work in terms of the implementation. In regards to the development of the Women's Plan of Action to prevent violence against women and girls, as I've talked about, this afternoon there is a consultation in the Northern that will also rope in various agencies in this regard. Yes, violence against women is everyone's responsibility, and we need everyone to take ownership of this as we eliminate or work to eliminate violence against women and girls. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Madam, for that. Okay, let's now give our closing time for Mr. Levant, please. You can give in our closing remarks.
Thank you. And so I just really want to be very quick. I mean, it was a very interesting and inspiring event. So I really want to use the opportunity to thank all the panelists for sharing their insights, thoughts, experiences. And I think as an audience, which actually expands the ones who are connected to Zoom, but also through the FB, Facebook. I think the few messages have emerged. I'm not going to summarize all of them, but perhaps I would like to mention a few. I think it was very powerful to see some data about the status of gender-based violence in the world. And I think it can be concluded that Pacific is actually not doing any better than anywhere in the world. And if you think about you position yourself as being a male person and having a significant number of female relatives, I definitely do not want any of my family members, female family members, to be anywhere in those percentages. I'm sure every man feels the same way, but for some reason, because of numerous root causes or norms or socioeconomic fundamentals or foundations that our societies are based on, we are still facing gender-based violence. And this is not, let's not kid ourselves, it's not really going away anytime soon. It requires a massive mobilization of not only the awareness of actually what we are doing today, but also the rest of it. All platforms need to be used in order to change the fundamentals, if you wish, and make some gradual advancement. We also, it's not going to just one day we will have end of it, but I think we have to, at least by 2030, that what the commitment is, we really want to stop this happening. And we all know that the major catastrophes, societal catastrophes and challenges we are facing, the one that is experiencing right now, COVID-19, and a climate change that is the biggest game changer, especially in our region. There is a direct link and connection between those major events and all the vulnerabilities that are being posed under circumstances like this. And we've seen some of the experiences that, in fact, when it comes to gender-based violence and any aspect of gender inequality, things have actually gotten much worse. And we know why and how this operates and how it works. So I think what we are emphasizing is that in times like this, it is very important that we continue ensure as a society that access to services for survivors of gender-based violence are maintained and somehow provided for. which again is a challenge, as you know, because of hundreds of different priorities that the governments and societies may be facing with. But this is something we really don't want to give up on. And we've seen that there was several presentation and experiences that what we, in fact, in times like this, we were able to achieve through various initiatives or programs, and Spotlight was one of the examples. And we heard some passionate stories from Vanuatu. Yeah, definitely. Again, we are facing socio-economic crisis almost everywhere in the world. In the Pacific, these are all well documented. Actually, that means that income levels have gone down, but somehow we have to make sure that we have to prioritize funding for minimum wage for essential services. It also includes the aspects of prevention of GBV, as well as making sure that the funding are available for women rights organizations at grassroots level, which is definitely essential in times like this. Yeah, so as policymakers, as we know, can play a huge role in this regard, and by investing in essential services to ensure the safety of women and girls, and to not to create another generation of violence, which is very likely if we are leaving this bare. And as far as the UNDP Pacific is concerned, we are committed to addressing gender inequalities through which, and among others, would also include support to women-oriented women's organization, recognizing their important role as first responders together, of course, with key line ministries and the private sector. So again, we all need to join our hands. As I mentioned in my opening remark, during 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, with the aim of creating awareness and act to end violence against women and girls in partnership with the government and civil society. And we need to work together to ensure that essential services for survival are maintained or adopted where they are not really existent. So again, thank you, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, and it was really wonderful to have you in this meeting. And I also want to use the opportunity to thank our sister agency, UN Women, Sandra in particular, as well as various the Ministry of Women and Poverty Alleviation, as well as representatives of civil society groups in Vanuatu, in Fiji. I believe we also have other countries present. So really thank you, Pinaka Wakalevu, and Tagio Tumas.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Levant, for that remarkable speech. On behalf of everyone, I would like to take this opportunity, in particular to the non-state actors, which include civil society, NGOs, faith-based organizations, community-based organizations, formal and informal groups in all communities in the Pacific region. I would like to sincerely thank UNDP, UN Women, and all partners, in particular the steering committees of the UN Spotlight Initiative. Your contribution to eliminate violence against women and girls in the Pacific is making a significant change in the lives of our women and girls. There's still a lot to do. As we know, a lot of our speakers and panelists have spoken about the strategies and ways forward. Domestic violence issues, there's no one-size-fits-all resolution to eliminate violence against women and girls. So like our Fiji One Talk said, we need to stick together. Partnership is very, very important. So let's stand together, let's unite together, let's fight. Following us on TV, on Facebook. If you look at this, we have a UNDP will continue to receive questions and will give you answers on Facebook. So follow us on Facebook. Please look at the link and follow us, and let's keep each other warm, and let's give each other solidarity through the 16 days of activism. So thank you, Thomas. Malo, Minakavakalevu, everyone.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank you. All right, before we go, let's take a video shot. Unfortunately, I had very difficulty in trying to have my beautiful logo behind me. But thank you so much for all of you that you have your logos on. So this is what I am going to do. So, okay, so I am going to shout, "Orange the world," okay? And then you put your right hand up and you say, "End violence against women and girls now." Okay, ready? All right, let's do this. Those of you, can you please, come on, we want to see your beautiful and handsome faces. So please come on. I'm going to say, "Orange the world." Put your right hand up in solidarity and say, "End violence against women and girls now." All right, let's do this. Orange the world.
End violence against women and girls now.
One more time. Orange the world.
End violence against women and girls now.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Malo, everyone. Thank you. Happy 16 Days of Activism.
Thank you.
Merci. Thank you.